Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at Vintage Motocross Radio. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. Today's show is brought to you by Vintco. Keep the ride going. Preston Petty products. The legend continues. AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. Racer X magazine on your newsstand and online. And of course, Vintage Motocross Q&A. Join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. on Facebook. My guest this morning began riding motorcycles in the fields of Evanston, Illinois in 1969 at the age of 13. It wasn't long after that when he discovered a new sport that was growing in America called motocross. With his natural talent, along with the support of his family, sponsors began to take notice, and it wasn't long before motocross became his profession. Fast forward 50 years, and the kid from Illinois is still involved in motocross as a vintage racer, a publisher of Racer X magazine, and he plays a pretty mean blues guitar as well. It's my pleasure to have as my guest this morning, Scott Wallenberg. Scott, are you there?
Hello.
Scott.
Yes. Joe.
Yes, sir.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. I can hear
I hope everybody else can. Otherwise, we'll have a nice chat for a while, and that's okay too.
We will, Scott. Thank you for being here this morning, and I hope the introduction was appropriate.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was very accurate too.
Oh, good. I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. Scott, I guess we should just really begin at the beginning, as they say, and.
Okay.
Most of us have had an interesting story about our first bikes, either how we purchased them or how they came into our lives. But your first bike came to you because of an 8-track tape player.
Correct.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, my father, everything, a lot of us we had that influence. How did it start? How did you get going? Who taught you on a bike? Well, my dad, who built his first bike out of bushel baskets, he said he bought for $5, a Harley JD model. Mm-hmm. He said he had a manual and a crescent wrench, and that's what got him started. And so he had a passion for motorcycles, and then he went into the war, in World War II. He was a radio man on a sub-chaser boat. And then life gets in with 3 kids in the 50s and so forth, and kind of forgot all about motorcycles. And he was a television repairman in a shop, mm-hmm. and he had a customer. Somehow my dad got a hold of a Lear Jets, made the first 8-track tape players. And this guy, customer said, I'll trade you a Honda 50. It's called the CA110. It wasn't 110 cc's, but it didn't. It had a high pipe on it. Yeah. And it wasn't a step-through model. And that just rekindled motorcycles with my dad, and I was 12 at the time. And so naturally, after riding it around a little bit, I got to get a bigger bike. So he got an X6 Hustler Suzuki 250, a used one, which was really a cool, fast bike. Yeah. And then we went to watch this thing called a Moto X. We'd gone to Santa Fe Speedway, watched some flat track, watched some TT. I was enamored with the jump, the one jump that they had in the TT. But this was a big track. Bart Markle, all the boys came. They had nationals there and everything. But we went to this Moto X in Wisconsin at Elkhorn, and it was the internet. We didn't even know what motocross was, but that was it. So we go to this race, and Torsten Hallman, Åke Jansson, Bengt Oberg, Yuri Staduka, Brad Lackey, Carl Berggren. I mean, all the guys were there, Gary Bailey. And I just stood there with my mouth open for 3 hours going, this is the greatest thing I have ever seen. No doubt about it. This is it. This is what I want to do. And my dad spoke a little Swedish, and his Swedish was one of a 5 or a 6-year-old, because that's when he lived in Sweden for a little while, and my grandmother taught him the language. And anyway, so the guys were kind of funny. It'd be like a little kid coming up and talk to you, but still they were impressed with it, and somehow we became friends when they came over for these races again. But
sure,
I mowed lawns and shoveled snow And I got one of those CA 110s. It was $75. I had to split the price. I raised $35, and my dad paid the other part. And now I had a motorcycle. And we started going to these fields just to ride it around as much as I can. And then you get a better bike and a better bike. And finally I bought, this was $400, 69 Sachs, 125 iron barrel. Mm-hmm. That was the first real motocross bike. Now, you have to remember, when I was in high school, I was only 4'11" as a freshman. My first driver's license said 5'1", 90 pounds. I wanted to be a baseball player growing up. I loved baseball. My mother loved the Chicago Cubs. But when I got to high school, there's no way I could hit a pitch.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, I feel your pain.
Yeah.
You know. So,
I don't know, Joe. You sound pretty tall on the radio.
Yeah, yeah. I appear much taller on radio.
Motocross was just me and the bike. As my dad said, all you have to worry about is the track. You don't even have to worry about other riders. At this point, your battle is to get around that track. And if you can do that, then okay, that's the first step.
Which was absolutely excellent advice, no question about it.
And so that was it. I mean, all I thought about, dreamed about during school, everything else was motocross. Got a better bike, got a DKW, a brand new one, 100cc model, so I could race the 100 class, which was a little less intense than the 125 class. And it worked pretty well, and I remember I got my first trophy. That was May 1971. They were paying 7th place. It was 3 motos, and somehow, I made the 7th place. And I got there to pick up my trophy, and they used to have a presentation, and they called my name, but they didn't have it. They didn't have a trophy. And so one guy, his name was George Stepanovic, and the Stepanovic family helped the track. Anyway, he went into the clubhouse and came up with this pretty nice trophy for a 7th place trophy.
Sure, I bet you still have it too.
I still have it, absolutely. I'm staring at it right now. And so, that was the first trophy, and there's just something about that. And I tried so hard. And my father never won a trophy. He raced motocross too. At 43 years old, he started riding, and but it was tough to get a trophy. I mean, that was your big thing, and then when you get one, you want to get another one, and it took me a long time before I got the next one. I always seemed... Yeah,
I know what you mean, Scott.
I always seemed to get 7th when they were paying 6th, and 5th when they were paying 4th, and you'd go up there, and I remember one of my dad's statements, he goes, if you go 1-1, you never have to go up and look at the score sheets and figure out the points and all that. Gee, if I get a 7th and a 5th they had these old scoring systems. So he used to say, if you go 1-1, you never have to even go up there. Just wait for the trophy presentation.
That's it. Hey, Scott, presently your job is the publisher of Racer X magazine, but you acquired some advertising sales experience at a very early age thanks to your dad. So tell us a little bit about that, because it seems like, in our years or the 70s, kids had to work to get cool stuff. And your dad kind of pushed you into a little bit of a job, and it had something to do with magazines. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a crazy story, but in 1974, after I graduated from high school, and I was planning to go to college, at least I got the forms, but a very generous businessman in Wisconsin, whose son raced a Husqvarna, said, I would like you to be my son's mentor and go to California and live for the winter and race CMC with the best, because I want to see if my son can make it, and that's going to be a really tough thing, but race with the best. And I said to my dad, Dad, what about college? He goes, you know what? This is college.
Oh.
To go to a trip like this and have the experiences of it, so forth, you can always go back to school, son. So we loaded up 2 bikes and a Volkswagen bus and drove out to Westminster and stayed and raced CMC. We raced OCIR Friday night, Saddleback Saturday, Carlsbad Sunday for 3 months, October, November, December. And in that time, I met FMF when they were just on a dirt road, and I was across the street, was getting my transmission done by Koba. If you remember, Sachs transmissions needed some work, and the Koba shift kit was the way to go.
Yeah.
So I'm going up and down the street testing this, my Works Factory Monarch, which was supposed to be Marty Smith's bike, but he left Honda before he could actually ride it. And so I got it, and it was incredibly fast. And so all these guys at FMF see me doing these runs up and down the street, going through the gears to make sure it shifts right. And Uncle Donnie comes out with a XR75 frame with a CR125 engine and said, "This is the fastest 125 made." I said, "You want to bet?" And we drag raced down the street, and I beat him. He goes, "There's no way that's a 125. That's a 175 kit. I got to look inside the motor." I go, "You're not allowed to." My dad said, "Nobody's allowed to look in that motor, because if they see it, then they'll know what the secret porting is."
And it did have secret porting, didn't it?
It did. It was done by a guy in Sweden named Bengt Lagerblad, who built 2 of those engines. And Teddy Boyko, once I got it back, and that's a whole other story that I don't want to get into, but I still have it now. I still have that engine. We found it after it was lost for 25 years. But anyway, my dad came out, and we met Uncle Donnie because my crank went, and I had to have it cage split, so he got the look inside. So then my dad looks around and says, "You know what? The European, unfortunately, 125 business is dead. And these FMF guys, well, I think they're a little crazy, son. I think we could sell these pipes back east." So he goes, "I want to order 100 exhaust pipes." Well, Donnie fell off his chair. "What?" He goes, "Yeah, but I don't want you to ship them all at once. I can't afford it. But if you ship me 10 pipes a week, my son Scott will drive around to dealerships, races, whatever, and we will be the FMF distributor for the Midwest."
And that happened.
So they agreed to it.
So you're out there peddling pipes for FMF during the week.
Yes.
And
because remember the days of UPS COD?
Sure.
Well, I had to sell enough pipes during the week because I knew that COD thing was coming next week. So I had a little pressure on me. But then all of a sudden hits the motocross scene or Midwest scene is a little publication called Illinois Cycle News. So my dad goes, "Wow, let's go meet these guys. Maybe we could get a write-up for our FMF business, buy an ad, so forth." Long story short, my dad meets these guys, and they say, "We're looking for a junior ad salesman." My dad goes, they said, "Do you know anybody?" My dad goes, "Yeah, I know somebody. He's only 18 years old, my son. But, yeah, I had credentials in the business as far as people knew who I was in Illinois and Wisconsin." So I went in for an interview, and the big question the guy asked me, it was Hertzberg and Kramer. They didn't know anything about motocross or that. He asked me, he goes, "Do you like Harry Chapin?" And I'm like, "Yeah, the singer."
Yeah.
Taxi. Yeah. I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, well, we think you could work for us then." So I got hired for commission against draw, $250 a month draw. And they gave me a phone list, a desk, a price sheet, and said, "Go at it. Call these guys up and ask them if they want to buy an ad." And the first guy I called was Vic Kraus Racing.
Yeah.
That was before he even started Sidewinder, but it was Kraus Racing. He was the big Mako dealer in Illinois. And I said, "Vic, it's Scotty Wallenberg," as they called me then. They used to call me Little Scotty Wallenberg, but I grew finally. And he said, I said, would you like to buy an ad? I work for Cycle Times. They had to change the name. Cycle News sued them for using Cycle News. And he goes, yeah, I'll buy an ad. And I said, you would? And that was my first sale. But I learned for 3 years that I worked there everything about that I could about it. It was like going to publishing college.
Yeah.
Somebody has to write the paper. It has to be designed. Photos have to be taken. Bikes are ridden, shot, ads sold, ads designed, money collected, post office. So I really got this incredibly strong background. And in the meantime, I also had to make a key decision. And that was, did I want to race professional, which was my dream, race pro motocross. I never said I want to be a world champion. I never said I want to be a national champion. All I said was, I want to race the nationals and Trans AMA for racing. Because the AMA announced the AMA Amateur National Championships the same time as I had to decide, did I want to, when I came back from this California excursion, and I felt like I really learned a lot and got a lot faster racing against guys like Mike Bell and Warren Reed and Dave Miller and Jeff Ward. And I'm like, my dad goes, well, if you choose this professional thing, you can't race this amateur series or go for the championships. It wasn't even a series. I said, Dad, I always want to race pro. I'm going for it. So I sent in to the AMA my professional license application with the data that showed, I won the Wisconsin championships and other things they needed to show that you weren't just getting a license and didn't know how to ride. And went at it. And the first national that I went to, I didn't make in fact, I think the first three I tried, I never made it into the last chance. Or I made it to last chance, but never got to the final. And it was tough because the top 10 riders were already pre-qualified, so that left 30 spots with 70 guys to go for 30 spots. And anyway.
And you're riding an FMF bike at this point, or what are you riding?
I was riding an FMF YZ monoshock, the first year of the mono bike. And so ironically, August 3rd, 1975, Davy Coombs' dad was the promoter at Brewston Mills, West Virginia. It was 90 degrees. The humidity was like 80%. I didn't get in the qualifier, but they were taking 4 guys in the LCQ, and I got third. 10 minutes. So I'd had a 10-minute qualifier, 10-minute LCQ, but I made the gate. And then 240 plus 2 lap motos.
Whoa.
It was hot. I was dead. I was dead already. Marty Smith lapped me 2 times. I remember that. But hey, I made it in.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, now it's possible. Now I know that I could do that. And that was at the end of 70 or 75. And then I got on the radar. I could segue into a lot of things. But anyway, I'm working at the cycle paper. I'm racing the nationals. I got a Mako ride. I got to race the support class. I had another dream to race a Grand Prix. I got to do that.
Now I do have a slide there, Scott, that came across. If anybody's watching, and it shows you wearing an FIM bib. It says Grand Prix on it.
Yeah.
Where did you race Grand Prix, and was that just, I know you had an FIM license too, so was that just an American thing, or did you travel abroad to race as well?
No, I didn't travel abroad. I mean, that was a dream to do that, but I did race the Mid-Ohio 125 race.
Okay.
That was 1977. I remember applying for my license. If you see, there's a picture of me with wild hair.
Yes, I have it. I have it here.
Yeah, because I woke up. I woke up, and my dad goes, "Get your you-know-what down to where you had to get a passport photo." I had to go to like a passport office or something and get a professional passport photo, and for this FIM thing. turned in all my paperwork, and I got accepted because I had an expert rating. You had to have an expert rating.
Yeah.
And in those days, if you wore a black plate, it means you were a novice pro. But if you earned 80 advancement points, they were called, then you got the white plate. And I earned that in 76. So in 77, I had a black plate. I had a white plate. Now I could enter the Trans AMAs without worrying. I could enter the GP. You still had to be accepted, but I did get accepted. I got to race against Gaston Rae, and I think he won that day, actually. And I got 21st overall.
Hey,
but
yeah,
I earned $200 start money, I think, and I think $50 other than that. But I kept my bib. I still have the bib, Joe.
That's awesome.
And that makes me feel good.
I bet it does. And Scott, your early history in the sport and the influences you had, like you just said something about the Donnie Emler thing and how, next thing you know, you're on this Monarch and across the street is Donnie Emler and history's being made and nobody really knows it. But
right.
one of the things I found very interesting was that your dad taking you to an Inter-Am race back in 71 at Elkhorn. And again, he befriends this Swedish rider with the little bit of Swedish that your dad spoke at the time. And this guy was obviously a big name in the GPs. He rode for Husky, he rode for Kawasaki, and he actually became friends with your family and stayed at your house. He was a big influence on you. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Torleif Hansen.
There you go, Torleif Hansen.
And Torleif Hansen was just, I had heroes. Torsten Hallman was a hero of mine for sure.
Yep.
Carl Berggren was another Swede who lived in Illinois and ran Torsten Hallman's warehouse for him. But Torleif Hansen, this guy was electric. He rode a motorcycle like nobody. I think he's, arguably the fastest guy that never won a world championship. Finished second, had problems, some injuries. But Torleif, he also kind of took a shine to my sister who speaks Swedish, and she's a Swedish teacher now. And he stayed with us in between the Elkhorn round, which was Wisconsin, and the Missouri round was the next week. So he spent the whole week, and I got to train with him a little bit, running, and we played badminton in our backyard at night. We set up the lights and had friends over. But in 71, after the Trans Am, so that was within the fall, and I was riding a DKW, and we were actually practicing at the track together. I got to ride with him, and he rode my bike around a little bit, Torleif did, and he said, no pictures, Husqvarna, my contract is I'm not allowed to ride any other brand of bike or be seen on it. But he rode my DKW around. He goes, my dad goes, well, what do you think for Scott for next year? We're hearing rumors about a Husky 125. And Torleif said, you didn't hear it from me. I've ridden the 125 Husky. But there's this other bike from Sweden called a Monarch that I think would be much better for Scott. So my dad remembers this conversation. And now he's got to figure out, how do we find a Monarch?
Were they even being sold in America yet, Scott? Were there dealers? What happened?
Well, it's a funny story. Monarch was, before 1972, they were tank badged MCB, which stood for Monarch Crescent Belag, which is like the Monarch Crescent Company.
Okay.
Right? So, Rockford Motors in Rockford, Illinois.
Yeah.
They were the importers for Bridgestone motorcycles.
Yes.
But they also brought in MCB. So my dad, I remember, he got off of work, closed the shop. We drove out to Rockford, and we went knocking on the doors, banging on the doors because we got there late. They closed at 5 or something. And my dad's banging on the doors of Rockford Motors, and finally somebody says, what are you doing here? My dad goes, we want to get an MCB. We want to find out about MCB. He goes, we stopped importing them. You need to contact Intertrends in California.
Okay.
That's all we knew. So my dad goes, I guess, information, 411, whatever, and he gets a hold of another Swede named John Olson, who was now importing Monarch. But he hadn't brought any bikes in yet. They were just starting to get it going. They didn't have any dealers. So my dad goes, we want to get a Monarch to John. He speaks a little Swedish with him, gets inside track,
Sure.
And John said, we don't have any dealers in Illinois. So my dad goes, well, how do you become a dealer? And John says, well, you got to order 4 motorcycles and 10% of the order in parts, and you could become a dealer. So my dad immediately thinks, okay, I've got another Swedish friend. His name is Hans Damstrom, who's a Volvo mechanic and at a Volvo store, not a dealership, but a mechanic type place where they just service Volvos, probably Volvos and Saabs. And so he's got a son named Rolf. So we're adding them up. Let's see, if Scott gets one and Rolf gets one and Hans wanted one, we sell one more. Well, we got our bikes at dealer cost and we got some parts. And Hans said, well, I'll set up a little dealership. We couldn't do it at my dad's television store. They wouldn't allow any motorcycles in the TV shop,
right,
and so forth. So but we got it going, and we got these bikes, and they showed up in June of '72, and I've got pictures of the uncrating of them, and my dad sitting on them, and oh man, this was like Christmas.
I bet.
Never ridden one at all. But we went to, I think, Elkhorn, Wisconsin on a practice day and broke the bikes in. And we decided, okay, we're going to take it out there. Still had a 125 barrel on it. I was going to go and ride the 125B class. They had a deal on Saturday at this track, Motorsports Park, Byron, Illinois. Joe Vincer started it, and they're still running today. So they've been running motocross since 1970 there. So they decided to split it up and have B classes on Saturday and A classes on Sunday. So I don't know if it was a wedding or something, but my dad couldn't go. And my mother, well, God rest her soul, she passed away a few years ago, but she said, I always felt bad that I made your dad go with me to this thing instead of going to see you ride the first time on the Monarch. But Hans brought me out there. I entered the 125B class. Now, I only had 2 trophies up to this point, so I had no credentials really. But I got on this bike, and I won. And it was like, whoa. I mean, unbelievable. It's like magic. What happened? So the next day we said, okay, we're going to enter Scott in the 125A class because he won the B class convincingly, so you're not a B rider. But I never considered myself an A rider. But anyway, the next day we entered the 125A class. I was running like 4th place and the pipe fell off. And it was a big argument with my dad and Hans because Hans said, you better pull him off the track because with only half the pipe on, the rings are going to expand. You might blow up the engine.
Right.
And, so anyway, that was my debut, though, that weekend. And they took a picture of me holding that trophy. And my dad sent the info out to Monarch, and they wound up making that ad.
Yes.
The out-of-the-box winner.
Yeah, that was like, it's strange, Scott, because that was actually my next question was, the Monarchs were great bikes for you. And on that day, on your first race, you kind of made history and your picture wound up in the advertising for the bike.
I know. And I still get, every once in a while, I get a Facebook thing or an email with that, hey, look what I found in a back issue of Dirt Bike and Cycle News, and yeah, that ad ran a lot of places. But so the next week we put 100-barrel on, so I could race the 100 class.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and I won my debut in the 100 class on the Monarch. And again, everything just worked. There was something about me, that bike, my riding style, whatever it was, it clicked.
Yeah.
And so we started winning these races. And so now people are asking my dad, how do we get a Monarch? How do we get a Monarch? From other states even. And so my dad wound up not quitting his TV business, although John Olson thought that my dad did, but my dad became the rep for Monarchs in the Midwest. And so he would go and visit dealers in Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, and set up dealers for Monarchs. And for a while there, you couldn't get one, and they were expensive.
Yeah.
They were not cheap at all. But the whole out-of-the-box thing was it came with Girling shocks, it came with Geriani forks, it came with Magura, it came with Metzlers or Trelleborgs. I mean, if you bought an AT1 Yamaha, you were going to spend way much more money in the long run.
Sure.
Buying all the stuff.
Yeah.
But like anything else, when you have to write a big check, sometimes you just get panicky.
Yeah. Well.
So.
Eventually, people learn though that sometimes it only hurts once instead of it hurting five or six times.
But yeah, the Monarch thing was just a wonderful experience. And again, all of these, when I think of how my life has become, but it all kind of started with that. I met Emler through the Monarch and the FMF thing, and then the
Yeah, I wanted to.
Other
I wanted to ask you about the Emler thing and the Dave Miller thing, but I also wanted to bring to the listeners to their attention that on that Monarch that year you had 17 wins, 8 seconds, and 4 thirds. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of racing for a teenager still going to high school.
Well, it's funny. My first Monarch contract in '74, where I actually was paid $5. I had a $10 a race contract with a limit of a maximum amount of 35 races. So to get $350, they said they're not paying you for anything more than 35 races.
Now,
but we never even considered, Joe, ever missing a race if you could. I don't care what it was, we were going to get there.
Yeah.
And if you pulled into the track and it was a sea of mud, it's a mud day today.
Yeah.
And that was a really important thing too that my dad had taught me. We would drive anywhere to go to tracks that we didn't know instead of riding the usual. We would go to Indiana. We would go to Michigan. We would go to Southern Illinois, wherever we could go. So that he goes, if you're going to race pro, you got to be good in all conditions. You have to be able to handle it. And mud was something that if you grow up in the Midwest, you're going to have a lot of mud races.
Sure.
You better figure out how to do it. And because I was so short too, I couldn't touch the ground. So I had to develop a riding style because if I fell, I couldn't pick up the bike at first.
Yeah.
It couldn't even start it. So that mud, he would say, just stick with it. Finishing will get you, because a lot of guys will quit. A lot of things happen. And some of my best national and pro races were done in extreme mud.
Yeah, you have to, Dave. I mean, I've even Scott. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've even seen it to where during vintage races that I had attended, and when I lived in the Northeast and stuff like that, and it would rain and it would become a quagmire, and you'd have guys that traveled 150, 200 miles, and they'd say, "I'm not even taking my bike out," and that always puzzled me how long someone can drive to get to a race, and then because conditions aren't optimum. Well, you're not going to race that day. And as a professional or as a guy climbing through the ranks, you don't have that luxury.
No. I rode I was so fortunate. I got to ride 9 out of 11 Trans AMAs in '76. I was sponsored by Mako Midwest, and I was riding the 250 support class, which was great. I didn't ride the international class. I didn't have a 500 bike to even do that. And but of the 9 of 11 that I rode, 7 out of 9 were mudders. It started at Ohio, it was muddy. Unadilla, I got to ride Unadilla in the grass. Axton, Virginia, muddy. St. Peters, Missouri, incredible mud. Rabbit Run, Texas. The only ones that were dry was Phoenix. I remember Phoenix was dry, and Sears Point, which that scared the heck out of me. Honestly, I've never been so terrified on a motocross track as that, because I'd never experienced those kind of hills.
Oh,
it was just like, I was like, oh my God. I mean, I've ridden hills before, but not like these.
Yeah, I was going to say you had ridden Unadilla, which I've been to many times, but you are right. I mean, the hills in Sears Point are even beyond what Unadilla had. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think Warren Reed that day was on fire, incredible. If he won, I think he won the support race that day. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how I did, but I have little notes and things like that. But I know it wasn't anything spectacular. But again, part of it was just being so darn happy to be there.
Yeah,
it was part of it. It was all about the experience, and you don't get better unless you race with guys that are better. And yeah, I got it. I tied for 99 one year for that, but I got my 3-digit number, 613. People ask me about 13. I don't know if you knew how important 13 was to me.
Well, yeah. You know what, Scott? Now that you bring it up, it was when you got that first. Was it the DKW that it had the Sachs? It was a used bike, so it had a number on it.
Correct. And the guy who I got it from, Mike Tiskus was his name, he was a sign painter. So he had actually stenciled out and made beautiful professional painted plates. Number 13.
Yeah.
And in Wisconsin, 125s had to have red plates with white numbers. It's the 125 classes thing. So we got the bike home, and I said to my dad, Dad, one thing, that number 13, it can be an unlucky number, and maybe we should change it. And this is the days of electrical tape and pie plates, whatever. And my dad said, if you think we're going to take those beautiful painted plates off your bike to put on some pie plate electrical tape job, forget it. You're 13, you'll like it. That's your number. And that was it. Okay, and I got known as number 13. I tried 7 once, didn't like it at all. There is a couple pictures of me there I could have number 7, and I raced once with it. Said no. And then when I turned pro and I asked the AMA for my 3-digit number, I said, could I have a number with 13 in it? And they gave me 613. So that's why when you see those pictures of me with 613,
yeah, that
was my pro number.
When I was looking through the pictures, I'm saying 13, 613, and I'm wondering, it's just got to be a coincidence, because who would ask for that number after the 13 incident? But hey, Scott, I've got to go back for just a second here, back to kind of your amateur days in the Midwest, and I'll tell you why. I've got a guy that stops by my shop every now and then, and he wants Monarch parts, and we talk different things. And your name came up in conversation one day, and he said to me, back in Wisconsin, I was a pretty good rider. In fact, I raced with Scott Wallenberg. I said, oh, that's great. I mean, how did that go? He was fast, he said to me, but one day, I beat him one day. And I still have the trophy, and I wrote on the bottom of the trophy, beat Wallenberg. and his name
Is that Dave?
yeah, you know who I'm talking about?
Dave Houghton, yeah.
Yeah.
He wrote a DKW, and then he switched to a Monarch.
Yes.
Like I did, and then he brought up his riding another notch, and I believe it was at Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and at the track there. I don't remember the details of the days, and I have notes, but anyway, good for him. But he was going that day.
He told me about it, and I said, well, someday, if the time is right, I want to ask Scott about that, and we'll see how all this stacks up. hey, Scott, in '74, you were a senior in high school. You got an offer from a shop called E&J Cycles to be a part of their team, along with another kid named Eric Scrudland. And Scrudland was really fast, and he caught the eye of American Honda, along with another kid from San Diego who was quite fast too. Do you remember who that other kid from San Diego was?
Well, was his name Marty?
It is, and
Marty. Yeah, well, there's another kid from San Diego named Marty that rode a Monarch also, and that was Marty Moats. But I know we're talking about Marty Smith.
We are, because of the Monarch thing, and him leaving Monarch really opened the door for you. But I'd like to, if you can, to maybe tell us a little bit more about how that all shook out.
Well, we met Marty Smith for the first time in '73, and we went to the World Cup, it was called. This was before the FIM granted World Championship full-blown status to the 125 class. They decided to have this thing called the 125 World Cup. And there were two groups, a Group A, which was North America and Sweden and Belgium and other countries, and then there was a Group B, and the top guys from Group A and Group B got to go to Yugoslavia to race the finale, to be considered the world champion or World Cup winner. So all the guns were there in the 125. I was not a pro yet. I was just there we were like support for Monarch. We just wanted to be there because we were crazy fans anyway. In fact, I remember my dad had an old Sachs engine in the back of his van, and he pulled right up to the pit window at the track and goes, "Spare engine for Monarch." And he points to this thing, and they wave us in. We didn't have to pay or anything. So we were hanging out, but we met Marty, and we wanted him to win, and he didn't have a good day that day at all, but got to meet him and his dad, Al. I'm not sure if his mom was there at the time, or Nancy actually, but this was August of '73. But we met him, and he was a nice guy, and he was so fast, and we thought, oh my gosh, this guy is something else. And of course, he was something else, and Honda liked what they saw in him, and he switched over in, I want to say September, maybe the first week of October, to Honda. He was riding at that time. They were the silver tank first year '73 125. So now, unbeknownst to him, to Marty, this Bank Lagerblad had built this engine in August of '73, and by the time it arrived in the United States, Marty was gone. Yeah. So the motor, and maybe even the whole bike, arrived to Wisconsin to E&J Cycle, and Eric Scrudland got to ride that bike a couple times, but he decided that he was going to jump on the Elsinore bandwagon too, because E&J was a Honda dealer. And as good as the Monarch was, it did have the Achilles heel of the tranny. Yes. And even with the Koba kit, that made the shifting from maybe 75% effective to the 90% range. Right. But you could lose a race right off the line. The big throw from first to second. It's just can't tell you how many times the frustrations we had, but that's the way it goes. But what Eric Scrudland also, because he was a Wisconsin guy, he got on the radar more to Harley Davidson.
Oh.
So you might want to ask me about my experience with Harley Davidson.
I have it here in my questions, and you know what? Being you brought it up, Scott, I'm gonna jump ahead on my questions, and I am gonna talk to you about that right now. Many times on Facebook or in other forms of social media, when the Harley 250 MX comes up, your name is brought into the conversation. So I really wanted to know, what exactly was your connection to that bike at that time? Was it pre-production? Was it the fork era, the rear fork thing? When were you there, and what happened?
Well, fortunately, being located in the Midwest and Harley's 60 miles or 70 miles away from where I lived and our local tracks, in 1974, in August, at the local track, Byron, the same track I spoke about before, where I raced the Sachs for the very first time in 1970 and won on a Monarch. Well, in 74, now I was only, again, about 5'1". Eric Scrudlin's shop was also a Can-Am dealer. And Eric somehow got it was serial number 13. I kid you not. 250 MX Can-Am. And Eric raced it a few times, but then they were a Yamaha dealer, and the first, he got a hold of the very first monoshock. So he goes, "You want to ride the Can-Am?" "Sure."
Scott, hold on a second. I think we just got disconnected. I'm going to get Scott right back on the phone. So please stand by and we'll find out what's going on here. Please stand by. I'm trying to reconnect with Scott Wallenberg. He was right in the middle of his of a Harley Can-Am.
I have no idea what happened there.
It's fine. We're good, Scott. So
am I here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're back on live. It's perfect. So Scrudlin gets the Can-Am, then he wants a YZ monoshock, and what happens after that?
He gets me the Can-Am. Now I'm like 90 pounds on this thing, but it was so fast. But Harley showed up with a kid named Mike Lewis, who was another very fast 250A rider, and they selected him to ride their bike at this race. And Dick O'Brien, the head of Harley Racing, I mean, Mert Lawwell's boss, everybody's boss, Dick O'Brien, showed up at a big, it wasn't even a box van because it was a truck. It had Harley painted on the side, and they brought it out, and Mike Lewis, they came out. This bike was one with forks in the back. We'd seen a few prototypes before, but they were ridden by some Harley employees just for testing purposes, not really super fast or anything. But anyway, Lewis was out there, and I remember I got like fourth or something. And I think that's like right away. Look, hey, Mr. O'Brien, my son Scott here.
Hey, Scott, I've got to interrupt you for just 1 second. The sound quality is not what it was the first time. Did you have a microphone or headphones or anything? Do you still have those on?
I have everything on. I haven't changed anything.
Okay.
Now, how's this?
Better, I think.
Better? Worse?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So Dick O'Brien says, "Hey, your kid's a little small there, Wally. Come talk to us in a couple of years when he grows up." But anyway, the following year, I get the job at Cycle Times, and now we're a publication, and I'm testing bikes, and we hear, the Harley, they had, now they're making a few more. Again, these were strictly from the race shop, nothing to do with production at all.
Okay.
So we inquired, and for 4 months, we asked Harley, could we test this bike for the magazine, Cycle Times? No.
finally they relented in the midsummer of '75, and Eric Scrudland and I were brought out to this track in Wisconsin called Astaland. It's right by, not far from Milwaukee. It's halfway between Milwaukee and Madison. You can see it off the freeway. We're at a secret test session with my dad, a photographer named Mark Thompson, and Harley guy, and me and Eric. And we rode the bikes. And I got to tell you, they were impressive for us. One, they had long travel. Yes, they had the forks in the back. We hadn't seen them before. Nobody tried them. Everybody was experimenting at that time with all sorts of things. And I really don't know why they get such a bad rep about it. People look at it and go, well, that can't be right. But that was not the problem with the bike at all, in my opinion. They were a little bit heavier.
Mm-hmm.
But in the motor, the bikes that we rode at first, these were Champion frames. We had the Kayaba forks with the canisters on it. These were factory prepared bikes. They were very nice. And now the question was, what is Harley going to do next? Well, their next step was to build 100 of these bikes for pre-production. And I think 10 of them actually had 360 engines in them, Aramachi engines. But I got to be, they called me up, a guy named Rex Marcy, and he said, we'd like you to ride this bike. This is an assembly line bike. And just to enter it in some local races, go to local tracks, test it, ride it, give us their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So I got I had to sign a little contract, and I got an orange jersey, which I regret. Somebody out there, you have my Harley jersey. I'd love to have it back. And I also mad that I never Xeroxed the check I got from Harley for $75. But I entered it in a few races. Unfortunately, I never finished on that one. I had some problems. The flywheel fell off one time, and the shear to flywheel key also.
Mm-hmm.
But I did, I spent a lot of time riding as far as that goes, and the prototypes were better bikes than the assembly line bikes, for sure. Better materials, lighter weight, but then they continued on the project. They switched to, the next thing they did is they hired 3 guys, Eric Scrudland, Ricky O'Brien, and Rex Staten, to show up at the Florida Winter Am Series in '76 with the idea that, okay, we've got 3 of you going in, but only 2 of you are going to make it to ride the bike at the Nationals. And unfortunately, Eric hurt his ankle, I think, the first race with it, and he was pretty much out. And so they hired Rex and Ricky O'Brien, and Ricky was a really fast guy from Central Illinois, and he did some good results on it. But Rex was Rex. So,
Sure.
and of course, he could destroy him. But at the same time, that's when they switched from the forks and they went to conventional shocks on those bikes. And then they came out with the real one, which they built 1,000 of them with the leather strap gas tank.
You mean the production model?
The production model, which I tested. It wasn't a bad bike. It was just 2 years old in design.
Yeah.
It was patterned after an RM 250C. But by the time it came out, it was a 2-year-old kind of thing.
Yeah. Hey,
so
Scott, I've got to go back to another. We were talking earlier about the Cobra kit in FMF, and you being there at a very, very interesting time where a guy named Dave Miller happened to be working there at FMF and was starting to really create some very unusual bikes, and I think he created an unusual one for you as well. But back at FMF in those days with Dave Miller, while you're there, what were some of the things that you were seeing being built there?
Well, they had it was really interesting. Is you had Uncle Donnie there, who was kind of like the guru of the engine porting and designs, and he was basically taken under the wing of E.C. Burt.
Yes.
So he came under that E.C. Burt school of two-stroke porting and pipe design and things like that. So then you had a couple of guys, the Haig brothers, H-A-A-G.
Yeah, Robert. I remember Robert was one of them.
Robert Haig and Steve Haig.
Yeah.
And those guys did the porting itself. So they were there with the grinders grinding to Uncle Donnie's specs. And then you had Dave Miller, and Dave Miller was the fabricator and kind of at the time, he was kind of head of pipe production. And they had like 6 or 7 guys that were welders. It was like an assembly line thing, making mostly CR-125 pipes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was it. Later they branched out, but Dave also did these creations. He had put the Zundap engine in a Penton frame and he also he called it this Honda-Kawasaki, where he put a Kawasaki engine in a Honda frame with Honda-Kawasaki. I mean, Dave was just, he was a Picasso of design stuff.
Yeah.
And he just realized that, and this was right at the transition at the end of '74, and I saw what he was doing, and I commissioned him to build me a Monda. So I left my frame there. I can't remember how we did it, but he had the frame and an engine to work with, and he spent 3 months building this, putting a Honda engine in a Monarch, because I really loved the way the Monarch handled.
Mm-hmm.
I really did. I thought it was a better handling bike than in Elsinore at the time. So, I had to lay down shocks. I had a lot of things. I was used to the bike, and I loved it. But once we got it, and we just weren't great fabricators on our end of it. I would have been better off to just give Dave the whole bike and just go, when you're done with it and you've tested it and so forth. But we rushed on it, and the sprockets are on the other side. It just wasn't.
Yeah, you didn't.
What it was.
Well,
It didn't come out. The idea was great on paper, but it just wasn't what we thought. And so we abandoned the project, and that factory Monarch engine, which we took out, after my dad passed away suddenly in '82, a couple of years later, my mom goes, "What am I going to do with all this Monarch stuff in the garage?" And it's only 7 years. It's only 7 years old at the time.
yeah.
I'm like, I don't care what you do with it, Mom.
Yeah.
Scrap. Give whatever you can for it. I'm living in California. I'm like working for NXA and Dirt Bike at the time. I'm like, and now, then 20 years later, I'm going, Mom,
Yeah.
can you remember at all what happened to that Monarch stuff? That engine, that works factory engine. I'm like,
They're gone.
oh my gosh.
They're gone,
Oh
Scott.
my gosh.
Hey, you had quite a year, like 76, 77, you had a factory Mako ride, but you were still riding that 125 from Donnie Emler in FMF. How did were you riding 125s one week, 250 the next? How did you divide up your time between those bikes and the events?
Oh, well, we'd look at the schedule, being based in the Midwest, and we'd say, okay, let's take a look and see where a 125 National is. And I was riding the 125 Honda at the time, 76. And then, I wasn't planning to ride the Mako in 76. I was going all out to be the 125 rider and go to all the 125 races. But I was working for the cycle paper, and part of my duties were to test bikes. So now in the Midwest, Midwest importer, Debenham Imports, brings the new 250 AW, Adolf Weil replica,
Yeah.
the AW. And they call up Cycle Times and go, we want to do a bike test on this. Sure. We go out to the same track, Motorsports Park, Byron, Illinois, know it well. Here's the Mako Midwest guy. Here's Kraus, who had already got the bike. He had dibs on the very first one. So they brought it out. The photographer, I don't know, I think my dad was there too. And I start riding this thing. And I'm like, this is the greatest bike I have ever ridden for 250 and so forth. I'm like, this thing was magic. Felt like I did on the Monarch.
You loved it right away.
They come back to me and go, you just broke the track record by 3 seconds. I go, what? And based on that test, Mako, Roger Debenham, said, we want to sponsor you. We want you to ride this bike. You have to work with a local dealer, which was Big Kraus.
Yeah.
So I wound up wearing Kraus's Fritter logos. We had black jerseys, logos went over well in the summer, and black leather pants. They were Hallman pants with Kraus on the lettering on the side. But they were the really good CP pants. Carl Berggren, he lined up with those, and for Hallman. And so I was sponsored by Hallman and had this bike. And then a really brilliant engineer from Norway named Olaf Aen, A-A-E-N, was building hot Polaris snowmobiles and two-strokes. And he developed a high pipe, a floating brake, and a few other tidbits. I even had an electronic ignition. At the time, Motoplat didn't make one for a Mako. This was from a company called Krober in Germany.
Okay.
And I had a Krober, and I mean, this bike was really fast after we did it. And so they supported me in 76. So I looked at the calendar and go, okay, in the Midwest here, because I still had a day job, I still had to get back to work at Cycle Times. They weren't real liberal about me just blowing off time to go racing.
Sure.
Which, yeah, I know. Like Hertzberg and Kramer were money men. They didn't know anything about motocross. They didn't have any passion for it. But Kramer liked bikes. Hertzberg was more of a snowmobile guy. But anyway, so we'd look at it and go, okay, we can go to this race in Ohio, Missouri. If it's a 500 national with a 250 support class, I'll ride the Mako there. If it's a 250 national with a 500 support class, or that, I'll ride the 250. So I'd have to look on my thing how I balanced it out. But in some races, locals, I just ride both classes. But I was used to riding 100 and 125. I'd have to get off the 100 and then ride over to the 125. My dad would hold it on the line if that's the way the motos were. Sometimes they split them up because there were a couple guys doing that. But that's kind of how I did that for 76. And then Mako was kind enough to support me again in 77. Now my relationship with FMF changed during 76. Another company in Minnesota called PDI, which the D of DG started this PDI, and he ordered way more, and I was too busy to really spend any more time on FMF, so we just kind of let that go.
Now, how did, if my research is correct, and I believe it is, you went on to Montesa briefly after that as well.
Well, okay. My dream, as you know, being Swedish,
is to ride a Husky.
was to be a Husqvarna factory rider. I mean, what could be the more pinnacle than that?
Right.
And I was in discussions when the 77 season ended. Mako bought out Debenham, and Mako Midwest was gone in terms of being a distributor. So that evaporated my ride because Mako East had guys, Denny Schwartz and some other guys, and Mako West had their guys, and hey, that's the way it goes, right? So now I'm shopping or a 250 ride. And I was in touch with a guy named Larry Wise, who was the distributor named Cosmopolitan Motors in New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Do you remember that name?
I do. I absolutely do.
Okay, so Larry Wise said, we're bringing in this all-new Montesa. I don't know, it was the VR or whatever it was for 1978. It was an all-new design bike. And he goes, we'd be very interested in you and riding it. And at the same time, I was in discussions with Niels Arne Nielsen, who at the time was working for Husky, and we were trying to see if they could find a little something in the budget. Let's see if they have a little something in the budget for you to get a bike. And because I didn't have enough money to buy a bike, and I felt like I was fast enough that maybe, somebody would support me on something. But, so I'm in this discussion with Niels, and he goes, I don't know. The clock's ticking. Now it's February. Now it's March. And I'm like, Larry Wise goes, I've got the Montesa deal. I go, okay, Larry, I'll do it. And so I signed a little agreement with them and was going to go through the big Midwest dealer called The Great Escape, Bob Welcher's company. And the bike was delayed, did get it until April. Rode it, the first time I rode it was at Motorsports Park, Byron, Illinois, and it had really thin fork tubes, Marzocchi, some all new fork tubes. I didn't have those little plastic covers on it.
Yeah.
Or if I did, I can't remember, but I got a nick in the fork tube, and now I couldn't ride it for another 3 weeks or something while we're waiting. It was a good bike. I won't say, but I didn't get enough time on it to really know if it was a good bike or not. I raced it only a couple times, put my foot down in a turn, May 23rd, 1978, Byron, Illinois, same track, fought a true red, twisted my knee, MCL, which at the time was a big deal. Now it would be like I'd be back on the bike in 3 weeks, right? But in those days, they put me in a cast for 6 weeks. I had to wear a brace. Anyway, the same time when I'm rehabbing, I get this job offer to move to California to work for Dirt Bike and Motocross Action.
I was just gonna. You threw me with that one. My Dirt Bike and Motocross Action. You're going to work for them now, doing what?
Selling advertising, because that's what I was doing for Cycle Times. Yes, I tested bikes. I helped deliver papers. I did whatever was needed to do. But my main thing was that advertising is what drives the train on all publications.
Yes.
Yes, you can make some money on subscriptions and so forth, but the advertising is where it's at. And I was, because of my national experience, because of a few things, I had met Super Hunky, I had met Dick Miller, and I did the Trans-AMA programs in 1978 when Joe Parkhurst and his company, 2 weeks before the first Trans-AMA folded, and now the promoters did not have a program. And I said, I'll do it. We figured out a way to get it all done. The first one was printed in newsprint. The next ones were all on glossy paper. And so this was a big thing for Cycle Times to do the programs. But I went to Supercross in November. We used to be at Anaheim Stadium. And I bumped into Rick Simon, and he goes, Scotty, what are you doing? And I go, I'm working for Cycle Times. Things are going well, blah, 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 blah. He goes, well, Heitork decided they want to go in-house, and they want an advertising guy for the West Coast. Would you be interested? And I go, well, Rick. And I know Rick can talk very well, so I'm not sure if he's really true with this or not. He goes, I'll put in a word for you with Mr. G, who was the owner, Bill Golden.
Yeah.
And boy, sure enough, 3 days later, I get a call from Bill Golden, said, we'd like you to come out for an interview. I go, whoa. Okay. So I flew out to California, Golden picked me up at the LAX, interviewed with my boss at the time, Rush Marion was his name, and they said, "We want you." I'm like, "Geez, I was making $12,000 living at home, 12 grand, and this offer's like 20 grand. And like in a car. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I went to my boss because I said, I owe it to these guys to at least let them know that I have this offer and see what they say, because I felt loyalty there. They took me under their wing when I knew absolutely nothing. But Paul Hertzberg gave me a pat on the back and says, "Take it. That's more money than I make."
How many years were you back and forth between? Well, how many years did you work at Dirt Bike? How many years did you work at Motocross Action?
Well, the two of them were together. So
from High Tour, yeah,
they're owned by the same company. Mm-hmm. So my job was, I started there in '78, and I worked there for 21 years. And at the time, it was just really my concentration was on dirt bike and motocross action. I was lucky. I did know a little bit about the industry. I was a former professional racer, so I could speak to guys like Donnie Emler and Eddie Cole and John Gregory with the credentials of having a national experience and expert rating and all that. But yet I knew by bootstraps learning how to sell advertising and help. It's all about helping. This is what I learned early on, even from my dad. It's not just making the sale. It's making a customer for you hope for life.
Yeah.
So if a guy walked into my dad's TV shop, he knew that not only would he buy the TV and walk away, but he'd have Wally, your TV man, there. If anything happened, you were there. You were there. We made house calls. So it was the same thing with me. If the ad doesn't work, they may say, "Scott, you're a nice guy and everything, but hey, the ad's not working." Well, that's the worst thing I could think of to happen to me. So I have to really think, how can I help this guy have his ad work, and so that he becomes a customer all the time. And sometimes it's painful to tell a customer, "You know what? I don't think this artwork you turned in is going to work. And I know I need the money, but let's go back to your art department or whatever and rethink this plan." And now I'm in a tough position too, because I'm dealing with, at one time there was how many clothing companies? And I'm working with all of them. Axo, O'Neill, Fox, Cinesalo, Toho, you name it.
JT.
And I know what JT, of course.
Yeah.
And now I know what these guys are planning. I know what everybody's planning. I have to be as neutral as you can be.
You have to be like a judge,
so
right?
It's very, very interesting. I still think today about how many companies and brands. I think every guy you've ever had on your show, I must have done some business with them in some fashion. So, and I still love it. I mean, I'm very, very, very blessed to have been able to hang in there and still love what I do. Love being around the sport that's meant so much to me.
Sure.
And to be able to do it again. I mean, vintage motocross, let's face it, it's as close as you're going to get to recapturing your years of I say to my people, high school.
Yeah.
All I had to worry about is decent grades and not do anything really stupid. And, man, go racing. And you got the support of your parents and everything else. There's really you don't have a care in the world. And so those feelings, though, when I get on my little Monarch now, it's my favorite still motorcycle to ride, if the conditions are right, of course. Nice, easy kind of track, and I don't mind getting some air on it, but nothing, riding a modern racetrack. It's just no fun.
Yeah,
but I still can get excited enough to get on the starting line and go, really, Scott, are you really this kind of wound up over this now after all these years? I still get that really wonderful feeling, and I'll be honest with you, there's times where I'm on that bike and I can just see my dad holding that chalkboard.
Yeah. We are a very fortunate group that we can go back and do what we did as kids and still be in the moment, because there's a lot of people that are just sitting in some not cubicle, but maybe they're just in their house looking at some pictures about, what used to be.
Well,
But we get a chance to go out there and actually do it again. I know you do a lot with the Boise Inter-Am race every year, and you bring out, a lot of people come out to that, including of course Brad Lackey, Lyle Lovett, and so many more people. And speaking of Lyle, I have to ask you this. I see a lot of pictures of you, and I've seen you play guitar in person too, but there's pictures of you with Lyle, with, of course, Scott Cox. I mean, I have a picture of you in the slideshow with Eric Clapton. When did you fit in learning how to play guitar with all this motorcycle and advertising going on?
Well, I got to tell you something. There's another thing about motocross. Everything that I've done, there was something had to do with motocross connection. I learned. I'm an ice hockey player too, and so why did I get into ice hockey? Because one of my good buddies in high school who loved hockey said, Scott, if you play hockey in the wintertime, the muscle groups are very similar, a lot of them, to motocross. Great way to stay in shape. So that's how I got into hockey. Then I always loved music, and I like to sing, but I wanted to play guitar. I had a guitar when I was a kid, but I didn't know anything, and I gave up on it. But when I was 21, I told my mother, I said, Mom, I really wish that I had learned to play the guitar back then. And lo and behold, on my birthday, here's a $25 acoustic guitar and a book, How to Play Mel Bay's Fun with the Guitar, my first song, Skip to My Lou. And so as my dad was driving to the races with me, I'm learning to play those chords. And he goes, stick with it. And my hands, guitars are funny things because some of them are really chunky and they're hard to play. And other ones are great to play. But usually beginner guitars are not very good, and that's why a lot of people quit, because their hands hurt so much. But anyway, I stuck with it, and I was like, okay, and you just work at it. And so, but I had plenty of time, hours of driving in the van, and then at night and everything else. Once I developed a passion for something, it was like motocross. I had to do it. I had to do it, and just to do it. And so, Lyle Lovett. It was interesting. Our buddy Scott Cox had a radio show called Bike Week Radio.
Yeah.
And do you remember Bike Week Radio?
I do.
So I'm listening one. I believe it was on Sunday mornings. I listened, and there is Brock Glover, who of course was the host. And here's our call-in guest, Lyle Lovett. And I knew who he was, and I knew that he was a famous player, but not any kind of, really not a blues guy, so to speak. Later I learned about his development on blues. But anyway, I'm listening to the show, and Lyle says, this is 2012, and he says, I always keep riding gear in my tour bus because you never know. So I go and look up on the schedule, and I see he's going to be playing in Boise, Idaho. This is July. And I thought, I'll reach out just for the heck of it to Brock, because Brock was buddies with him, met him at Motocross Invasions or something in 83, I think. And so I said to Brock, Brock, I would love to take Lyle out for some kind of riding if he really wants to. And Brock, who happens to have a Sun Valley place too, 2.5 hours away from Boise. He said, well, I'm going to be there around that time. So we put this together with the help of a local dealer, got some bikes lined up for us, and they knew the trails, and took us on a wonderful trail ride, which ended at night with little dual sport lights. Couldn't see a thing, but had a wonderful time. And Lyle came to the house, and such a great guy, and he loved pennies, and he grew up. We had so many similarities, working at a bike shop, and his mom worked for a little cycle paper down there in Houston area, Gold Coast MX News, I think it was called, and we were both in the Lutheran churches, and it was just like, wow, these similarities. And he came to the house, took pictures of my Monarch, and we played guitars together, and believe me, I was so nervous. This is like, if I dropped the ball playing guitar with this guy.
Yeah. Well.
And I had to apologize to him. If you saw my office, it looks like a shrine to Eric Clapton, because Eric was my hero guy for music, and I love to sing like him and do it. And I said, Lyle, you're not going to see any Lyle Lovett stuff on the walls. He was so funny. You know what he said? He goes, that's okay, Scott. I had no idea you were a national motocross rider.
So
And we started texting each other, and I told him about my events in Boise, and I think it took a couple of years before he never knows where his life is going to be with tour schedules and so forth, but he goes, if I can make it, Scott, I will. And lo and behold, we got it lined up, but we had a 125 Husky for him to ride, and Lasse was there, and Mark Blackwell, and oh man, we had such a good time. We put on all these Team Sweden jerseys. I had Scott Coxon's about as Swedish as you are. He was wearing the team manager jersey, and David Bailey was there. And we had David Bailey wore the jersey, and we did a ceremonial lap with Lasse, and David was on a quad, and Lyle, and oh man. And then to cap it all off, we had Lyle Lovett come into our local pizza joint, which had a house band that the owner, Brad, has passed away. And we actually had Lyle Lovett come up on stage and played. And there are calls coming into the pizza joint going, we hear Lyle Lovett there. The people at the phone didn't even know he was in there playing. They said, what are you, nuts? This is Pizzle Chick.
It's just, it's incredible how the motorcycle world has brought you around to so many different things that you've loved, including advertising and music. And then next thing you know, you're playing guitar with Lyle Lovett, and you're on the track with him, and it really is.
Eric Clapton had a dirt bike in 1969 when he lived in Los Angeles, and he rode out in the desert. We talked a little bit about that. Not a big passion of his, more bicycles and cars, but he did that. And you know the band Jethro Tull?
Yeah.
Well, Ian Anderson, he's a trials rider. He was on the cover of Dirt Bike magazine.
Ian Anderson was?
Yes, when Len Weed was the editor in 1976. You can find it, and there he is riding I believe it was an OSA trials bike, no helmet on. And so just by chance, I'm at the airport in Burbank going to the show, the U.S. Open. Remember when it was at the U.S. Open was in the MGM Grand?
Yeah, in Vegas,
and
sure.
There's the whole band. Because I saw him the night before didn't know him, and I just went up to him and I said, hey, Mr. Anderson, do you remember being on a magazine called Dirt Bike? And he goes, absolutely, I remember it. He goes, I still ride now. I have a Fantic Trials bike. This was 20 years ago, I think, now. But anyway, he was as gracious as you could be, and I had a cover. I was working for Dirt Bike at the time, and I had the magazine, and he signed it, and all his band members. And my sister, who's passed, she was a huge Toll fan, and they all wrote things to her because she was going through cancer treatments. And anyway, just the greatest guy. But again, here you go. The sport and attracting people and having that common thing that you can talk about. It's like I joke, people go, oh, Lyle, love it. Wow, you talk about music. And I said, that's his job. Now, Lyle loves to talk about motocross, but it's my job. But at the same time, I love it too. And he loves music, but you kind of, I'm always a little careful because, hey, who wants to talk about work all the time?
Of course. Hey, so, Scott, there's
the fun aspects.
We are getting close to being out of time, but there is something I did want to talk to you about and also give you some time to discuss it. As we all know, we sadly lost Marty and Nancy Smith back in April, and it seems that, again, this week, you lost a friend and somebody that was pretty popular in the industry, and I wanted to give you some time to just talk about that.
I appreciate that. We lost Marty, we lost Dave Miller,
and
now Rod Anastasia. Another cancer battle like David's that just seemed like you think, okay, well, this isn't, we just go and we get the treatment, and then, it doesn't always, unfortunately, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I have other friends where it is working, and they're battling, and if you're listening, you guys, you know who you are, and, we say prayers for that. I hate that keep adding these people on to our prayer list, but that's what we have to do. We do our best to support and help.
Yes.
On that, but this has just been a great time. I do want to shout out something also, just a thank you, not only for all my years at Dirt Bike Magazine and Roland Hines and that, although I started before he even bought the company, but also to the Coombs family for what they've done, because that's just been, my Racer X ride has been just eclipsed 20 years.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because I was a friend of, speaking of music, did you know that Davey Coombs' dad was a professional bass player with albums being done? He was part of Seals and Crofts before they became Seals and Crofts.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so we had this friendship, not only just through the Dirt Bike Magazine and those guys getting their promotion company, but also this interest in music together. And he came and watched me play a little bit. And we did an industry show with Jim Gallagher from Thor was the drummer, and Dave Coombs Sr. was the bass player. Tim Buck, who was the DG guy at the time, he played rhythm guitar, I played guitar and sang. It was called this was called the Survivors Banquet at the Cincinnati Trade Show. It was a banquet that was put on for people that were in the industry for 20 years.
Wow.
And this was 30 years ago.
Where does the time go, Scott? I have.
But the Racer X thing has been great. I mean, here's Davey, who starts this thing in the basement, basically.
Yeah, I was doing a little research on that too, and it seems like, in 1998 there was this little underground newspaper called the Racing Paper, and today Racer X is all over the world. You're the publisher, and I mean, that was on my list of things to talk about. If you want to still continue on with that, Scott, I would love to do that. If you want to tell us about that, or you want to tell us maybe the next time and come back, it's up to you. If you want to do it, do it right now. I have no place to be.
Well, I don't really have anything to do right this second as well, so I'll give you the real quick story about that.
Yeah,
I had this wonderful career at Dirt Bike and Motocross Action. Been there 21 years, and friends. But I was always friends with the Coombs. Now, when I'm 25 years old and Davey's 15, because we're 10 years apart, we didn't have any interaction, but I did with Dave, Big Dave, and Rita.
Sure.
And so, but when Davey was doing the underground paper, first it was called the Racing Paper. It was just a District 6, Pennsylvania news. Davey was a great racer himself, but he did get injured. He had a KTM support ride, but he got injured. And his dad said, well, we're going to have to figure out what you want to do. And he liked taking pictures and writing, and he had some creativity. So he went to West Virginia University, got got his degree in journalism and started doing this paper. And then he expanded it a little bit, the racing paper, and he said that he was driving, and he thought a couple things. One, everything his parents did had an X in the name.
Oh.
Cross country, motocross. So that's when the racing paper became Racer X. But it was still a newsprint thing. And then this was like 97. I remember he called me up and he said, Scott, I'm thinking of taking my Racer X paper into a glossy magazine. And I go, oh, Davey, you don't know what you're in for. I said, I'll tell you, if it's another Me Too, SoCal type testing magazine, you've already got Dirt Rider, you've got Dirt Bike, you've got Motocross Action. I don't think you got much chance. He goes, no, I think it's cool. I go, well, okay. So he says, I think that People magazine for motocross would go, a lifestyle magazine. I said, well, I will say this. You do have a premise now. You have a focus.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not, I mean, you could have a focus on lots of things. People have tried a flat track magazine or other, but if the market's not big enough, if the audience isn't big enough, if the advertising isn't enough, geez, I mean, it's just like at High Torque, we were going to do a jet ski magazine, Jet Ski Action or something. But at the same time as the jet ski thing was happening, mountain bikes started. And we looked at, the audience for mountain bikes is, hundreds of thousands of units, where jet ski market was around 90. So how many are you going to sell to?
Yeah.
If you get 10%, that's only 9,000 magazines. That's not enough. So anyway, Davey does this little tour of California to visit with his idea. He's looking for backing, financial backing. So he goes to the big companies, Fox, No Fear, Oakley, CTI, Deep Races, asking for seed money. And I'm sure he felt really bad when he had to fly back home with not one commitment from anybody. Now, they all said, Davey, well, hey, we could buy some ads, we could do this, we could do that. And I had told Davey, too, I said, advertising is the key. And I said, unfortunately, a lot of guys that are supporting you are not people that could buy an ad if their life depended on it. I mean, that's just the way it is. Mechanics, team managers, all those guys love, of course, riders. Of course they want another magazine out there to get more publicity for them.
Yeah.
But you've got to convince the boardroom that you've got something here. But he goes, so what did his parents do? They figured out a way to finance. And printers, by the way, it's cash up front for a new magazine. They're not going to give you any credit.
So how did they raise the money, Scott?
Probably dug somewhere in the basement and used the family savings.
Oh, okay. Well.
Okay, and so they financed that first issue, and Davey shows up at the first year, 1998 Indy trade show when they moved it from Cincinnati to Indy. And there's Davey walking around with that magazine, that glossy magazine, had McGrath on the cover. And I said, holy smokes, he did it. It was very well done. I was like, wow. And I felt like, man, son of a gun. Gee, I wish I'd have done that in a way. But then, so they were doing it every other month. Now, Davey's dad was terminally ill at the time. And he got to see the first issue. and he got to see the second issue. Now, a first issue is like an artist, like a Lyle Lovett or anybody, puts out their first album. They've had their whole life to work on the first album.
Yeah, it's the second one that
Now,
matters.
the publication business, well, this one, he's got 2 months to do the next one. But he had the support of the industry. They liked it, so they were able to put copies into mail order boxes and so forth to get some circulation. Because I told them, if you can get a warm, fuzzy feeling from the advertisers that you're onto something, they might support you. So after issue number 2 comes out, admittedly, Davy's dad said, you know, Davy, this magazine is not as good as your first one. And he said, I want you to make this be your guide, that like racing, you're only as good as your last issue.
Yeah.
You're only as good as your last race. That you strive to make sure that that issue you just did is better than the one before it. And that's been his mantra. And then they were up for about a year or so, and I'm at the U.S. Open in Las Vegas at the Hard Rock Cafe. And I'm just walking in the lobby, and there's a sign that says Racer X Party in some kind of room there, a little room. And I walk by, and I happen to bump into Davey Coombs. He goes, hey, we're having a party in here. Come on in. I go, Davey. Going for Racer X. You know that. I can't go into your ring. I mean, I work for Motocross Action.
Yeah.
I can't go into your Racer X. He goes, no, Scott. A party is not a party unless everyone's invited. Come on in. So I came in and, walked around. I felt very strange, and a lot of people were kind of like looking at me like, what are you doing at the Racer X party? And Eric Johnson and these other guys were there. Anyway, Davey goes, my dad told me someday we're going to work together. And I said, well, Davey, I don't think you're buying High Torque, and I don't think High Torque's buying you, and I'm a lifer there, and da-da-da-da-da. But wouldn't you know it? I mean, how life goes. 3 weeks after that, I show up at the Rose Bowl for the Supercross in a Racer X shirt, and I just decided that this was the right thing for me at the right time.
And that was
no regrets.
21 years ago.
No regrets at all at High Torque at all. Really, none. And, we went through a lot of stuff there because when Roland bought the company, it was $3 million in a hole to the printer.
Whoa.
He had to put up everything he owned to finance that thing. But a lot of great things happened. The ATV market, those are all other stories about that I could go into for hours, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna say that it was great there, and the Racer X thing has been wonderful to take this magazine. The idea, their first production houses were Kinko's.
No, I didn't know that.
That's where they produced the magazine at Kinko's, and they also decided that we are going to have a quote-unquote website. Well, how do you get a website? They went to Barnes & Nobles and bought the book, Website for Dummies, and followed it page by page to start the very first motocross industry website.
And as they say, the rest is history, Scott. And sometimes, ignorance is bliss. Sometimes you just don't know. You jump in, you go. And if that's your passion, that's what you keep going with. And eventually, if you stick with it long enough, hopefully it all works out. So
you hope that it does. A real quick aside was video, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knew what video was going to become, but Davey said, we got this idea. We want to do Racer X films. I go, okay, what's it going to cost? I don't know. But let's just do it. So we posted the first videos. Little did we know that we were being charged a nickel for every upload or download of those videos at first. And it's like, oh my gosh. Oh no.
Wow.
But that was the whole idea, is you got to do it and then take a chance. And then, of course, I had to figure out how we were going to pay for it. But we did, and, things have changed now and so forth. But, still going at it. Looking forward to some vintage racing coming up here We had to move our Boise event as other people have done.
Sure.
And that will be, that started out, by the way, with 67 riders 12 years ago. 67 entries.
What'd you have last year?
We have 330 or something. We don't know what to do. We've got a problem with that. But we'll figure it out. Hopefully, we'll see how things roll in all the states for after the Nationals, which are going to start hopefully in August now. Had to push it back a little bit, but October 17th and 18th.
My guest today has been Scott Wallenberg. Scott, I want to thank you for sharing such great stories with us, for supplying me with some great pictures from my slideshow, and for all you do in the sport of vintage racing, and of course at Racer X Magazine. We're also grateful for that.
Thank you so much to everybody listening too. Thank you for taking the time and the shout outs and so forth that I'll probably see. And just bless you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Bye.
Bye. Scott Wallenberg has been my guest this afternoon, or as we started out this morning on Vintage Motocross Radio. I want to thank my sponsors once again, Vintco, Keep the Ride Going, Preston Petty Products, the legend continues, AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973, Racer X Magazine on your newsstand and online, and of course, please join me on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for Vintage Motocross Radio. This is Joe Abadi. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July weekend and you enjoy the rest of your day. We'll speak to you next time.